In a flashback, Jimmy says goodbye to Marco, his partner in running cons, explaining that as part of Chuck's work to get him out of jail, he's agreed to take a legitimate job in Albuquerque. Although Marco argues that it's a waste of Jimmy's talents, his mind is made up. In the present, Jimmy goes to HM to hand over the paperwork for the Sandpiper case, as well as Chuck's accommodations, since he'll no longer be handling them. Both Howard and Kim are impressed by Jimmy's dedication to his brother and his calm, matter-of-fact demeanor. He has a breakdown over Chuck while calling bingo at Sandpiper Crossing, explaining the full story of the Chicago sunroof. Back in Cicero, a very drunk Jimmy defecated through the sunroof of a man, Chet, who had wronged him. Unfortunately, Jimmy didn't notice that Chet's kids were in the back seat, trumping up the charges for what otherwise would have been a misdemeanor. Jimmy would have faced jail time and ended up on the sex offender registry if Chuck hadn't stepped in, and now he feels he's been paying for it ever since. Jimmy abruptly leaves and returns to his hometown of Cicero, where he meets Marco at the same bar Jimmy left before. Jimmy awkwardly mentions that he visited Cicero for his mother's funeral without meeting Marco, to his disappointment. Jimmy's agreement to do an involved con with Marco involving a rare $50 coin leads to an extravagant week of scams. At Marco's apartment, Jimmy finally reveals he's a lawyer, and he has responsibilities to his clients in Albuquerque. Although impressed by the idea of Slip-In Jimmy becoming a lawyer, Marco insists they do the Rolex scam one more time before he goes. Everything goes smoothly until Jimmy pokes Marco, who doesn't stir. Jimmy calls an ambulance while their Mark runs off with Marco's money. Marco suddenly stirs awake, peacefully telling Jimmy before he dies that this was the greatest week of my life. Kim calls Jimmy at Marco's funeral to say the Sandpiper case is so big HM intends to work with Davis and Maine of Santa Fe. D&M's partners know Jimmy has a good rapport with the elderly clients, so they want to hire him. Jimmy returns to Albuquerque to meet with them, but decides to pay Chuck a visit first. He stays in his car and sees that Ernesto, who Jimmy worked with in the mailroom, has replaced him as Chuck's caregiver. Jimmy and Chuck, seeing Jimmy's car out the window, hesitates but decides not to make amends just yet. Outside the courthouse, Jimmy stops rehearsing his speech to Davis and Maine and drives up to the parking booth. He asks Mike why they didn't keep the Kettleman's money. Mike recalls Jimmy wanted to do the right thing, and Mike merely did the job for which Jimmy hired him. Jimmy replies that whatever stopped him from taking the money will never stop him again, and drives off humming Smoke on the Water, the song Marco was humming just before he died.